Well, hi, Chris. Thanks for jumping on. Could you just introduce yourself, your role and what you do at BAM?
Sure. Chris McGinness. I'm the Regional Planning Manager for the Scottish side of BAM Nuttall. And I spend a lot of time working through programme analysis, peer reviewing, and doing the QSRA analysis, particularly at the tender stage for governance purposes and client specification.
What really was your approach to weather risk before starting to use the EHAB platform?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we did use a few different methods. So in some parts of the business, we used weather calendars within P6. So, 20% downtime in the winter, something like that, depending on what it is. In Scotland, typically, we weren't really happy with that kind of standard weather calendar because some of the remote work sites and coastal sites had a much bigger variance in weather through different parts of the year. So we used to purchase weather records from the local weather stations or through the Met Office and spend a lot of time trying to put some science behind the analysis as to how that would impact our projects and specific disciplines or activities on site. So that we did that to try and establish the downtime per month typically. So we try and figure out a number of different weather calendars. So for example, temperature affecting concrete, wind affecting crane lifts, rain affecting earthworks or concrete. So we tried to break that down into different categories, but yeah, we then created weather calendars either through P6 or when we're doing QSRA, we would do that. We would create weather risk calendars manually in Primavera Risk with a probability of 4 or 5 days in January, 3 to 1 days, or 1, 2, 3 days in February, for example, and then there'd be a distribution there. And we would apply that to all the tasks. That would be modelled then as almost like days off in the calendar whenever we've done the risk analysis, which I think is the right way to do it. But it was really very time consuming, and we were always trying to optimize how we did that analysis, because the science of taking it from a bunch of average weather records, turning it into an impact analysis is difficult to be precise about, and also it can be quite difficult to explain the approach to clients and decision makers. So that's what we used to do.
Once you discovered the kind of EHAB Acumen integration, what ultimately was the problem then that you were trying to solve with that solution?
Yeah, so BAM, we always say build it before we build it, which basically means we build it in the virtual world before we build it physically. So that means digitally rehearsing the work, all parts of the work before we put the big expensive plant on site and we have the high staff and prelim rates. So for me, this also includes playing out how the weather will impact us as well. And the EHAB approach to modelling downtime is the ideal way to do this. So yeah, weather risk that we included today had, as I mentioned, very little science behind it and difficult to explain and time consuming. So by using the EHAB analysis, we can use a huge data set quickly, and we can then combine that with our duration uncertainty and identified risk, which we define in risk workshops prior to QSRA. And we use that together with a detailed weather risk in the same analysis and can understand the impact of each separately. Also, the speed of analysis is critical at tender stage, especially for projects with higher risk profile where we have governance, we have client demands, we have lots of deadlines. And being able to clearly explain those inputs to risk allowances is key to success in those areas.
And do you think that approach then, that Acumen EHAB integration has helped you solve that problem? And I guess what has that enabled you to do since kind of adopting that solution?
Yeah, sure. So by running the detailed QSRA more quickly, really, and more comprehensively, which gives us, and being able to explain the different switches and thresholds and inputs to the overall analysis. So we can give one output which says that's our P80, but then being able to back calculate that and explain, well, this is this part and this is this part and this is this part, historically is quite difficult to do. on such a detailed statistical analysis. So by being able to separate these things and even go back all the way to, okay, here's the P6, here are the input of all the different categories and thresholds. This is the weather data, which equals this, and being able to separate it all out and be clear about what we've allowed for and why has well, EHAB's helped us to solve that really. And I think that I think the speed of analysis is really the biggest thing. And you know, what we've got now is a tool which jigsaws directly into our current workflows, but it saves a whole lot of whatevery about, well, is that analysis the right analysis? Is that the right weather calendar? Should it apply to all these tasks or these tasks? We can be more explicit about that and be clear to decision makers and clients.
What would you tell someone who is considering adopting the EHAB tool and also the integration with Acumen?
I would ask them probably just to test out how simple and fast the workflow is first. There are a lot of, as with any new bit of software or any tool that you use and any change to your workflow, there are lots of buttons to press and things to look at for sure. And certainly anyone who's used Acumen Risk will know that as well. But then just figure out the speed of the analysis. How quickly does it integrate and how quickly can you produce a result? That's probably the first thing I would do. Don't have to necessarily take that first result. But then I would probably think about focusing on the thresholds, about trying to keep that simple, trying to figure out how you then code that quickly in P6 or drop it in EHAB and use the categorization there, which is quite simple. And yeah, keep that simple, keep that directed, because it's also easier to workshop that with a wider team and explain any outcome. So if you're seeing any higher than anticipated risks popping out in your initial analysis and Acumen Risk, very easy to drop back into EHAB and use the mitigation tool to clearly apply mitigation and record it, so you understand what you've done, why you've done it, and you're able to do that in a workshop collaboratively with the team. You can go straight back to Acumen really quickly and rerun the analysis again, and you can see there's a clear trail of records as to how you've done that, which is really important for when you're trying to hand over a tender, particularly to an operational team, or maybe you're a quarterly review period and you're trying to explain to the client, well, this was our exposure, we're going to do this to mitigate. That then has a cost of measures, therefore we're going to increase the risk allowances here, and all of that's really useful as a cycle. So think about that as part of there's two parts to that, I guess. There's the tender workflow, how does it jigsaw into that, focus on the thresholds, test out the mitigations so that you can understand allowances and cost of measures and understand the benefit of those records. And when you've done that cycle once, you'll quickly find ways to optimize that and fit it into your normal workflow if it's slightly different from that. There's many ways you can use the output of EHAB, and you can take it directly into P6 as impacts, or you can take it into Acumen. So there's flexibility there, and it's really just running it, okay, testing it out, what's doing, and then going back to see how that you can better optimize that in your normal workflow like we have. So for us, it probably takes about 30 minutes to produce a new weather risk analysis from a new P6 program to an answer on weather risk, which can then be input to Acumen and incorporated into the bigger risk model. So that's half an hour. That's a huge time saving from what you would have to do before with analysis using calendars or taking it into Excel and trying to analyze against weather records. So yeah, I guess the key points is just try it, test out the integration, see how quick it is, think about thresholds, think about mitigations, and then optimize from there.
Do you know how long it would have taken you on average before EHAB? What would that, the half an hour with EHAB versus the...
Yeah, well, certainly for a project where we're taking the weather records from scratch from a tender, and we're trying to build that in, that would probably take us days in reality, because we would spend a lot of time taking the weather records from the 12-month averages or from the NEC 1 and 10, convert that into something meaningful in Excel, turn that into a report so that you can justify that this is the allowances we're making, then apply that in a risk calendar Primavera risk, which reality would probably take us at least half a day, probably a lot more for a large program, and then run your analysis. And then if you wish to mitigate something, you say, well, actually the impact of temperature is going to be less on these tasks, because you then have to go into Primavera risk calendars and manually adjust all of that calendar. So that, you know, that it's hard to say exactly, because the workflow isn't very clean or precise anyway. But yeah, days for sure. So days, you know, reducing to this half an hour with a good degree of confidence that the data is what we need. So we can already be more explicit and clear about what that is. So it also takes away all of that explanation time. So presenting things in certain ways, writing reports, then explaining that possibly to non-construction people takes time. Whereas the clarity around, okay, here's the things in P6, these are the codes, this is how we've categorized what they are. These items are impacted by these thresholds, these are the trigger points where we will incur delay. Therefore, this is the analysis. That's a much cleaner way than we had previously.
Have you discovered any maybe unexpected benefits of using EHAB?
Well, I think, to be honest, I think having done a lot of the risk analysis recently, QSRA is not the easiest thing to explain to people. And if you try to do it using cumulative probability graphs and talk about uncertainty versus risk and so on, people who are busy people running a job quickly glaze over. And it's often the case that they find it difficult to understand the result because they can't control the variable of the input. And really, for me, QSRA is all about being able to control the inputs and have the team decide what is the appropriate risk level, what is the appropriate likelihood, probability, and if it does occur, what will be the impact. And compared to previous workflows, EHAB really helps us in being able to control that and clearly what the variables are that are the inputs. And when people understand what the inputs are, they tend to not question the output. I mean, if it's extreme, they'll want to know why, but that also helps us because we're able to distribute weather risk throughout different disciplines. You can see more specifically using risk, reviewing the risk drivers. Well, how much is that impacting steel erection? How much is it impacting cladding and so on? And, you know, is it concrete that's the problem? Should we go? You know, it could also help you things with it. Well, should we focus the design more on precast than in situ? Is it wind that's a problem, or is it temperature that's a problem? And these are a little bit unexpected benefits that we are now seeing. Yeah, and also, you know, some recent contract negotiations on who should own the risk and to what extent makes me think that EHAB's probably perfect for establishing clearly what we're allowing at tender stage and what we can establish, what we can then say is the trigger to the client. So there may be an approach there that we can use as well that we're starting to negotiate on at the moment, because normally you either have an NEC 1 in 10 threshold or you have something else which is agreed as a threshold to clearly establish where the limit of risk is. And so we think there's an answer here as to where we can use this clarity and quick modelling to be able to ensure we can secure a weather claim quicker. So that's another thing we're working on at the moment.
I mean, we've worked together for a little while now, Chris, probably coming up to 3 or 4 years potentially. So you've seen the product from the very earliest phases when it was, you know, just a basic app. What do you think has been the most interesting change over that time, and how has that change, you know, how have you seen that change?
Yeah, sure. I think for a while, if I'm being honest, with the EHAB at the early days felt like a bit of a black box where I wasn't sure exactly what the data was and what the analysis was actually doing. So making a judgment on that, and probably more, well, as important anyway, being able to explain that to decision makers or the client was quite hard. So it was difficult to engage with for that well, it was more difficult to engage with for that reason, but I certainly believe that the approach as to how it models weather is the right way to do it, because it was similar to what I was trying to do myself in PRA. Now that you put a lot of work into providing the data and outcome analysis in different views in different ways, and writing guides on how it looks, how it works, that's much easier to understand and explain now. The user interface is also really improved, as well as the speed of working in there. A bit more automation, a bit more integration with P6, using activity codes to automatically assign categories, for example, is really good. And categorizing a program with 5,000 lines in it used to be pretty painful. But now we can do that, and we can turn that around in half an hour. So that's a really important factor for me. And if you prefer to just code it in EHAB, also there's some auto matching functions there which are really, really useful. And I think what I appreciate most is that you guys have worked really hard to understand what our existing workflows are and how that varies through the industry, and created integration that are suitable for that, and views of that fit with what their clients expect to see or are able to understand, and how that fits with our overall tender risk analysis process, as well as our ongoing process of being able to manage the projects and forecast short-term, long-term, what's going to be the impact now as the program shifts. I think there's built in a lot of different functions there which provide clarity and flexibility for decision makers and clients, and fit really well with what we're already doing. So it makes it very easy to adopt.
I think, Chris, I'm keen to just hear if you have any final thoughts or comments that you'd like to share about the integration with Acumen Risk, or about our product or wider business, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think the integration is great for the reasons I mentioned before, but I think the main thing is I'd say is I've always found that you and Felipe and the whole EHAB team have really engaged and been very quick to respond on issues, queries, or requests that I've made for new features or functions, and been able to provide, as you work in progress things, we're taking a little recorded video to say, is this what you meant? That being able to see that develop's been a real benefit and really valuable to me. And you seem to have a really clear mission in providing, weather risk management tool that really works for the industry. And I think that's excellent.
Chris, would you recommend the EHAB product to a planner or risk manager in any other business, on any other project?
Absolutely. I think that the approach of how you model weather risk, being able to model that in the virtual environment quickly using such a large data set is critical. And as we go forward in the industry, some of the biggest risks that are facing us is staff shortage because of lack of STEM graduates, and climate change. So as these become more important to projects over the coming years, I think it's essential that you have to have a robust way of managing risk and be able to do that quickly without having to have the attention of your own huge team of data analysts to be able to do so. So for that reason, I would certainly recommend EHAB.